Hi there my friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today is a video that I filmed back in December, and it's after I received a prototype watercolour set from Derwent. As most of you all know by now, I'm a Derwent ambassador, and when new things are brought out and they think they might be of interest to me, they're sent along. And they sent me the prototype 24 watercolour paint pan set, and I've since received the 24 and the 12 brand new now that they've been launched. I'm working on the Inktense paper, which is made by Derwent. So the paper itself is 9 inches by 12 inches. It's £140 in weight, acid free, 100% cotton, beautiful paper to work on, and I believe they class this as their cold press paper, so there is a slight texture to it. Now, working with these watercolours was beautiful. The palette sets do come with a water brush, but when I'm trialling a new medium like this, I do like to use my own brushes, something that I'm more familiar with. I did experiment with the water brushes with the sets, and they work fine as well. They're okay, they're quite small, they're okay if you're plein air painting and things like that, but when I'm in my studio I do like to use a more substantial brush. Hence that's why I'm using a normal brush and not the water brush that came with the set. So I had a cyclamen in flower on my windowsill at the time. It's still in flower actually, and so I took a few photographs of it and then brought those up on my phone, sketched them out on a separate piece of paper, transferred the basic outline over onto this piece of Inktense paper, and then decided to go in with a wet in wet watercolour background. And what I did is, and what I'm doing is wetting the paper first with clean water, it's deionized water, and then just applying pigment as I go, and it just creates a sort of out of focus bokeh style background. Now the colours are beautiful, all colours that I tested, they all work really well. They mix nicely, they've got a nice flow to them when they touch a wet surface, they blend well, and they all lift really well as well, which was a little bit of a surprise. So I did a sample sheet, like a swatch sheet, so I could get used to the colours by doing that to begin with. And the only one that had any real opacity to it was the white, and you will see me using the white right at the very end of the painting. White isn't something I tend to use in a watercolour. If I'm going to use white, I'll reach for gouache, which is an opaque watercolour, but the white worked really well. That's the only one with any opacity in it. All the others are very translucent, and yeah, brilliant. So let me tell you the colours that are in the set. So in the 24 set, which you can see on the right of the screen, the colours going from left to right are lemon cadmium, deep cadmium, mango, orange, poppy red, madder carmine, magenta, dark violet, amethyst, ultramarine, spectrum blue, kingfisher blue, jade green, bottle green, emerald green, grass green, olive green, raw sienna, copper beech, terracotta, chocolate, Payne's grey, ivory, and Chinese white. And in the 12 set, if you wanted to get the 12 set, the colours are lemon cadmium, orange, poppy red, dark violet, ultramarine, spectrum blue, bottle green, grass green, copper beech, Payne's grey, ivory black, and again Chinese white. And I believe all of the pans will be open stock anyway, so which means you can buy the colours individually. So should you run out of a colour, you can just buy that one pan on its own to replace the one that you've used up. And back to the painting. So as you can see, I've put the finished painting to the top left hand side of the screen, just so you can see where I was heading with this. And still going in wetting wet, so just wetting the area with clean water and then just dropping the colours in. Each palette does come with a nice mixing tray underneath of the lid. And what I've done now I've received the actual products and not just the prototype product, is made a little swatch sheet, laminated them, and then they fit nicely into the lid of the palette. So if I'm travelling, want to take it with me, or just need to have a quick glance at the colours, I can do so. So just popping some more colour in there. And I've just edited this video, and the track was on, obviously the audio was on, and I was actually listening to Christmas music and singing along to Michael Bublé while I was painting this. So yeah, happy times back in December. Okay, so just filling in those little areas there. And the reason I use deionized water instead of tap water is just that it contains no impurities. I didn't want anything to be messing with the colours or the paper while I was working on this. I wanted to get a true feeling for the watercolours themselves. I believe that all the light fast ratings are very good. I'm not sure if the pigment details are available. They might be available on Derwent's website. I'll have to look into that. And I haven't pulled any of the pans out, the palette itself, to see if the pigment numbers are printed on the side of the little pans. So that's something I will do later. Filling in that last bit there. And once I've worked an area like this, like the background, and I'm happy with it, then I'll dry it with a hairdryer just to speed it up if I'm in a hurry, or just let it dry. Either way, it doesn't affect the colour of the watercolours at all. It can just shift them a little bit in movement. So it's always best to let a watercolour do its own thing and dry on its own, especially if you want the colours to bleed into each other. Oh, sorry about my hair getting in the way there. Thought I'd edited all my hair out. Obviously not. Just making sure there that I was getting in between the leaves, the leaf structure on the bottom right hand side. Hope everyone's keeping well. Some good news is Derwent have asked me to run a workshop for them. I believe it's going to be towards the end of May, and it's in conjunction with Cult pens. So it's all nice and dry now, so I'm going to work on the plant pot. Now the cyclamen on my windowsill is actually in a ceramic pot that is just a whitish, an off-white colour. But I didn't think that'd be enough of a punch in this painting, so hence I've made it look like an earthy colour instead. Not sure of the colours that I'm using, the colour choices that I'm choosing out of the palette at the minute. Just reaching for anything really. Reaching for what I think is going to work. I did 2 of these paintings. This was the second one. The first one I did for Derwent just to test out the products for them and to give them some feedback. But they pretty much look they look very much alike. So just putting in a base coat here, and now I'm going wet on to dry. So I've not wet the paper first, I'm just going straight in with the wash of colour. I'm moving that bead of colour from left to right, right to left, just to keep it flowing, adding more pigment to it as I go, and just so I don't get any harsh lines within that initial wash. Just want to say thank you for the feedback from the latest video I published, which was the lion portrait in acrylics. Had some lovely feedback on that one. Thank you very much, and everybody that's liking and subscribing to the videos and the channel, it's truly appreciated. So I'm just mopping up a little bit of colour down the bottom there, You're not missing anything at all, nothing exciting happening down there. Just a bead of colour that went onto the masking tape. And I remember to move the board back up. So this is why I don't tape the paper directly to a table, is I do like to move the board about to make it more comfortable for me to paint on, and also by moving the board you can slightly alter the way in which the paint flows on the paper. So if I want the paint to flow in one direction, I'll just tilt the board slightly and help it along, let gravity do the rest of the work. So a second glaze going on there, and that's just building up the intensity of the colour. I have darkened the colour as well on the mixing tray, palette lid, and I'll keep moving it around just to get to the areas that I need to, with hopefully not getting in the way of the camera again. So just putting a little bit of a dark area in there just to creating the look of a shadow from the leaves, and quickly in with a hairdryer. As I said, you don't have to use a hairdryer, you can wait for it to dry naturally, but if you're in a rush and it's not going to move the paint around on the paper too much, then there's nothing wrong using a hairdryer or a heat tool. Just don't use a heat tool too close to the paper. I had no issues with buckling on this project. The paper stayed nice and taut, even though it only is 140 pounds in weight. I wouldn't ever paint on any paper that is a lighter weight than 140 pounds, because then you do run the risk of buckling. So just put in some directional marks in, add a bit of texture to that pot. As I said, the actual pot itself is a ceramic pot, and it's just sort of a creamy white colour, but it does have a very faint pattern running through it, so I just thought I'd pop that in as well. Adds to the interest of the piece. And the hairdryer again. I guess I could have edited out the hairdryer a bit, but you get the drift. And the masking tape is acid free, so if you have any problems lifting masking tape off, just go over it with a hairdryer or a heat tool and it'll loosen the adhesive of the masking tape, and then it should lift off and not rip your paper. Now I'm doing a lifting technique, so what I'm doing is just wetting the brush with clean water, moving it very, very gently over the surface of the paint and then lifting the pigment off, and it just creates these gentle highlights on the pot. And I was being so careful not to get any paint on the white paper surrounding the pot. The actual Inktense paper isn't very white, it's not a pure bright white. Their other watercolour paper is very white and it's a hot press, but I prefer working on a cold press. And this one just happens to be slightly off-white. A little bit more mixing going on there. The palettes do stain, but that's quite normal for a plastic palette to slightly stain. It doesn't bother me. I can still see which colours I'm mixing and the mix of colours that I'm making. The slight staining of the palette doesn't interfere with anything at all. If you don't like a stained palette, you can go over it with a magic eraser. I think people use them for cleaning houses and things, but after that, if you use one of those on a plastic palette, after using that, your palette will stain even more. So I just put up with the slight staining on the palette, it doesn't bother me. This actual prototype palette went back to Derwent after I'd worked with it for a while, and obviously they've now sent me the proper product, so to speak. now it's been released. So just making sure that the bottom edge is nice and neat for when I remove the masking tape at the end. So that's the pot finished, and now up onto the flowers. This was the Cyclamen in its prime. It only has about 4 flowers on it at the moment, so I'm glad I took some nice photographs when I did. So I'm going wet onto wet there. You can see how the red's feathered out towards the top of the petal. Oh, and I've got my Christmas jumper on as well. So this will be a permanent reminder for me that when I painted this, I was singing along to Christmas songs. So going in and just lifting some pigment out. So letting it bleed to the edge of the petal where the paper is wet, but then just lifting some of the colour out as it gets right to the tip of the petal, just to retain a lightness in that area. Back in with the hairdryer. This video is running just over half an hour. I've tried to include everything and not make it too boring for you, but just so you could actually see how well these watercolours work. Now going in with a little bit of a darker pigment and just building up some tone at the bottom. Now I could have done this whilst that petal was wet, but if you charge too much colour in and the paper isn't ready for it, it can create blooms. Some people call them cauliflowers, and I definitely didn't want that in these delicate looking petals. It's a nice effect for working stonework and sand on a beach and mosses and lichen and things like that to let blooms occur, but they can be very random. They're quite hard to control, and so it's not something that I wanted in this area of the painting. In actual fact, I don't think I used it in any area of this painting, but there's a time and a place for everything in art. So just tidying up those edges. Now it's dry, popping a little bit of a shadow in there. And this is when knowing your brushes comes in really handy. If it's a type of brush that you use a lot, or a make of brush that you use a lot, it's very, very helpful to know what can be achieved and what can't be achieved with your materials. And the only way you get there is by practice. Just practice, practice, practice. Practice makes progress, not perfect. That's what I always say to people. Because if we reach perfection, I don't think we'd want to carry on doing artwork, because there'd be no challenge. But I try and challenge myself every once in a while to do something new, try a different medium or the same medium but in a different way, try different techniques, make up new techniques. So I popped a little bit of water on there, and I'm just letting that pigment run around on that petal, do its own thing, and then tame it back down with a dried brush. So leaving the edges again just so they can be a little bit lighter than the rest of the petal, because that area of the petal is thinner, some of the light shines through. And now I'm going wet into wet on that area. So I haven't dried that petal with a hairdryer, just letting the pigment work its way back up the petal and into the pink area. It does give a softer effect. If you can control a wet into wet, the colours do tend to blend a little softer than trying to blend wet onto dry. Moving the board around constantly so it's comfortable for me to work and so I can see what I'm doing. Now working a little bit of a darker pigment down that petal, and again round to the bottom where the petal is darker but also there's shadow there as well. Tidying up the edges. And I think I worked on this painting over a couple of days. I never sit and work for, even if I've got 8 hours to spare, I would never sit and work at a project for 8 hours solid. I like to sit down, work for a couple of hours, and then go get a coffee or do something else, sketch something else maybe, or work on another project, and then come back, because each time you come back, you're coming back with fresh eyes, and you might see something you would have missed had you just sat and painted for a long time. So I do run workshops, and I always feel for the participants, because they're there for 6 to 6.5 hours painting for a full day, and it's something even I don't do, and yeah, it could be tiring, but it's worth it. So the petal in the middle, I just put a second glaze on, and that was just a glaze of the existing colour. And what it does, if you go over an existing colour, you know, with the same colour, you just build up the intensity of that colour, generally making it slightly darker. And this is another thing to remember when you're working with watercolours, they do dry about 25% lighter than when you initially put the colour on, so that's something to keep in mind as well. Sometimes you might think you're going in too dark, but if you put it on a little tester sheet first, 9 times out of 10 you're going in with the right tone of colour, the right depth of colour. So it was nice to get an added interest in this piece with contrast as well. That's why another reason why I didn't keep the pot white, because there wouldn't have been enough contrast between the actual plant pot, the plant, and the background. And all contrast is how dark something is compared to how light something else is within a piece. And the more contrast you have in a piece, the more interesting it looks, and the more lifelike it looks as well. So a little bit more glazing going on there. And always keeping a tissue in my left hand, so you can dry your brush on it if you need to go in quickly with a dry brush, and you can also lift colours out quickly. So yeah, I always have a tissue in one hand. So just putting some veining into that petal, working quite tightly round the stem that you can see in between the petals. The shift in the drying colour, so it dries 25%, roughly 25% lighter. It's a little bit different if you're using gouache. So gouache is opaque watercolour, and the dark colours dry a little lighter and the light colours dry a little darker, so that's another learning curve as well. I'm hoping actually that Derwent will bring out a range of gouache colours, because that'd be really interesting. Okay, so all of the petals, all of the flowers are completed. I've popped in a base coat wash on the stems, and now it's time to work on some leaves. Leaves, not leaves. Oh, I've not had enough coffee today. So base coats. So when you're looking at a photograph, or if you're painting from a still life in one of your rooms at home, or if you're plein air painting, you look for an underlying colour, and with watercolour you generally work light to dark. So you'd be looking for the underlying lightest colour. That's all a base coat is in watercolour. That's how I work it. I'm self-taught in all the mediums I use, and that's how I work. And this painting isn't completely 100% exactly like the photograph. There were some little details that I've left out, some leaves that I left out that just made it look too busy. I wouldn't say complicated, but if I'd have put every single leaf in that was in the photograph, I don't know if it would have made sense, because what makes a good photograph, it doesn't necessarily what makes a good painting, and that's where you can use your judgment. There was a flower coming out and leaning over to the left, and I omitted that, so I left that out, didn't get that into the initial sketch, because it would have just led your eye away from the plant itself, and it would have made for a very unusual and not very pleasing to the eye composition. But if in doubt, sketch a little thumbnail sketch out and just see what works for you. So if you've got a bunch of flowers in a vase, just sketch them out really roughly. Doesn't have to be in detail, and maybe you can move a flower to the right or the left, things like that, to make a more pleasing composition. But I'll say it now, the watercolour paints, they were lovely to work with. Really nice. I worked with quite a few different brands of watercolours, and these held up to all of the professional ones that I use. No qualms at all. Really, really enjoyable medium, and I look forward to using it a lot in the future as well, especially because these little palettes, they're big enough to throw into a rucksack and take plein air painting. So as you can see, the leaves towards the bottom of the screen, I've gone on with a second coat, a second glaze, and I've left areas of the base coat layer showing through, and that's all I'm going to be doing on this leaf. So this is the second coat of paint going on, and I don't want to cover all of that leaf that I've already done. I want some to be shown through, so you get a feel of the veins in the leaves and the structure of the leaf. And I've slowed this one down as well, so this isn't sped up, just so you can see how time consuming it is. But it was a joy to paint. And the reason I haven't done the buds yet is because I like to work from the back of a painting to the front of a painting, so that I'm not, if I'd have done the buds first, I would have been more worried of getting green onto the buds. But if this is the case now, if I get any green paint onto the area where the buds are going, I'll be able to lift it off or disguise it in some way, which I wouldn't had the buds already been painted in. So keep moving the board. I want to make sure that I can see everything I'm doing without hopefully getting in the way of the camera again. Nice and delicate around that area. And it doesn't have to be exact. If you want a more stylized looking painting, then there would be no need to do all of this. I just wanted, obviously you can tell it's a painting, but I just wanted a little bit of realism in it as well. And to be honest, I'm a bit of a detail freak, so I do like painting in detail. I find it quite relaxing. So sped up again and moving through the leaves now. And you can go on with a third coat, a fourth coat, as many coats of watercolour as you like, as long as I was using a very gentle hand. None of the underlying paint was lifting. If I'd have brushed on harder or with a stiffer brush, I could have lifted colour off where I didn't want it, which is really nice, especially for beginners. The prices on the Derwent website at the moment are £40 for 24 colours and £19.99 for the 12 set. Now I've mixed the white, so the Chinese white, with a little bit of green, and I'm adding a little bit of a highlight running down the edge of the leaves. And I do go on and dot on the leaves, give it a little bit of a texture, not a physical texture, just a visual texture, going down the veins and things like that, just to liven the leaves up a little bit more. And there you have it, finished Cyclamen in Derwent watercolour. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please hit like and subscribe if you haven't already, and if you have, thank you so very much. It's really truly appreciated. It helps the algorithms. Can't even say it. I think I need a coffee. I look forward to seeing you all soon. Let me know if there's any subjects or mediums that you'd like to see on my channel, and I'll sort that out for you. And until next time, I will see you all soon. Stay safe, stay creative, and take care. Bye for now.